Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you're having an outstanding Thursday morning. I'm really excited about today's show. I have a special guest, but I'll get to that in a moment. The first thing is, let me get my stuff all set up here. Welcome to the Break the Cycle with DSC podcast, which isn't showing up correctly on my little thing, so I'm going to go back over here. I'm your host, Dwayne. I'm an individual, much like yourself, who's been through a tough, difficult situation with a high conflict ex. And I developed some tips and techniques over the years, over the nearly decade I've been dealing with this, that I share with you to hopefully help you get your life back, break the vicious cycle that just keeps going on and on and on. And if you have kids, to help you rebuild or strengthen the relationship with your kids. And if you're dealing with parental alienation, to hopefully minimize that a little bit. I want to get into, let me get over here. My stuff's kind of messed up today. I'm not a therapist, like I mentioned. So the other thing is, only a licensed professional in a clinical environment can diagnose somebody with a personality disorder. So, and we'll get into this with the guest today, but be really careful when you go around and you've determined on your own that your ex is a cluster B narcissistic personality disorder. Maybe they got borderline, and you're going around and you're telling everybody that. It hurts your credibility. Focus on the patterns of behavior and try to make the best decision you possibly can to help you and maintain your credibility instead of hurting that. Anyways, since we only have an hour and I am really excited to have this guest, I'm going to go ahead and bring Marco in. Marco Brown is an attorney out of Salt Lake City, Utah, specializing in divorce. I personally found him through a TikTok video he was doing, talking specifically about, narcissistic divorce, which is the reason I wanted to talk to him. But Marco, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Dwayne. I really appreciate it.
Oh man, you know what? I really appreciate the fact that there's attorneys that understand this. So often in my community, people will be talking about, well, my attorney doesn't believe me, or no one's seeing this, or they're just downplaying it. And that video I saw of yours where you're like, look, you think you're dealing with a narcissist and this is what you need to do. And you just laid out like day one, do this, 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 and this. And I was like, holy crap, this guy gets it. And I appreciate you putting that out there for people to see so that they, one, know what to do, right? And know also that, yes, there are people that understand it. So the first thing I wanted to just dive into, when someone's dealing with, every divorce is going to be very stressful and complicated. That's just a given. What is the single thing that a person needs to know if you're dealing with this? Either, they've decided to divorce, or worst case, they've been served papers and they're in this scramble. What's the first thing going in that they need to really think about to help themselves and minimize any mistakes they might make?
For lack of a better way to put this, you want to go get an attorney, right? And I don't want to be the guy, I don't want to be the barber who says you always need a haircut, but you really do need to go get an attorney. And if you have a really, really simple divorce, you've been married for a couple of years, so there's no alimony at play, there are no kids at play, there's no real play, then you probably don't need to hire an attorney for the whole thing, but you definitely need to sit down with an attorney and go over what the laws in your state look like and how you should structure your divorce. So pay for an attorney, sit down for an hour, hour and a half, ask all the questions that you have, talk through things. You can get that done pretty easily. There are really good ways online to determine whether or not an attorney is quality. That wasn't always the case, but the last really 5 years, it's become much more people have become much more able to determine who a good attorney is. So spend a little bit of money, get that information. If you have kids, if you have a house, if you have a whole bunch of retirement, if you've been married a long time, then you really, really need to think about getting an attorney and meeting with one right off the bat to lay out a game plan and a legal strategy to deal with your divorce, because maybe you haven't chosen this, but it's chosen for you. So you got to deal with it.
No, that's a really great point. I want to ask you one little question that you mentioned on it. How do people know? How do people find a really good attorney? Because you're easy, right? You got all your testimonials on your website, which is outstanding, and plus you got all the content you're putting out there. So you would be an easy guy to vet, right? It'd be like, okay, this guy gets it. I know I want him. But I've had a lot of people ask me, hey, Dwayne, can you recommend an attorney? And I'm like, look, it's the entire world. I mean, because there's people all over the world who will listen to the show, and I have experience in a small little teeny tiny area. And I'm like, man, you need word of mouth. But what are other ways that people can really vet and determine if an attorney's right for them?
That's a great question, because it is difficult in the sense that there's a real, information and power imbalance between people who are not attorneys, and attorneys are not really good at getting their information out there. We're getting better at it, but as a profession, we're not really great at it. So this is the way I suggest people look for attorney, a quality attorney, especially a quality divorce attorney. First, you want to determine whether or not they do 100% divorce. Okay, so you don't want a neurosurgeon who does 50% neurosurgery and like 50% leg surgery. That's not going to work out real hot for you. And tons of attorneys will do 10 divorces a year. That's probably the average for somebody who does divorce, is about 10 divorces a year. And you can get okay after 10, 20 years of doing divorce at 10 divorces a year. But if you're doing 30 divorces a month, and you specialize and do 100% that one thing, you're going to get much better at it much more quickly. So you want to look and see if they do 100% divorce. I wouldn't ever go with a divorce attorney who did anything less than 90%. Then, go on.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to say that one of the things that going through my own experience is an attorney that does this all the time. They know the judges, they know the other attorneys, they know what you're dealing with. And I know some people's like, oh, well, it's an attorney, they can do it. And it's like, there's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, and if I was your client and I came in and I laid out my case, and you're like, hey man, I understand you really want that, but in this area, most of the judges tend to interpret the law this way. I'll say it that way, so that way it's not just a personality base. But I don't think people understand how critically important it is to have somebody who understands the theater or the stage that they're on and the different people participating.
Yeah, that's exactly true. So that's one of the nice things about doing divorce 100% of the time, is you get to know the family law judges, the regular judges, the commissioners, however your state is structured. And right. You have to know those personalities, because we're all human and we all deal with our own personality. So you have to know, okay, I'm in front of this judge and this judge likes this way of talking about this subject matter. Or, you can go talk to your other friends as attorneys who've dealt with that judge. You're just able to put together a much better strategy for your client when you're in this all day, every day.
Yeah. One of the things I just, when you first mentioned, like get an attorney first, I think, and we'll get into the toxic aspect of this in a little bit, but I think you have to do that to protect yourself, because I've heard so many horror stories where someone's like, oh no, we have an amicable divorce, everything's fine. They walk into that first hearing, their ex is lawyered up, and then just get nailed with false allegations and a complete change in the whole process. And then you're back on your heels. And if you don't have an attorney, you're you're at a huge disadvantage at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So if your ex or soon to be ex has an attorney and you think to yourself, oh, I can do this isn't that hard. The personal injury attorney on television doesn't seem that intelligent, so I can make do. You are going to get walloped. It's going to go very, very poorly for you. And whenever I say this, I always get somebody who says, well, I did, and I did just fine. Yeah, that's great. If you want to try to be the less than 1% that can figure this stuff out without a law license, go right ahead. The rest of you are going to get absolutely screwed in court.
I've heard people who've represented themselves, and I have some, I guess, colleagues that focus their channels on that. I know for me personally, it was too emotional. There is no way in hell I could have dealt with that amount of stress and then tried to perform in an arena I had no clue at, was just too much for me. So I'm a strong advocate for finding somebody to help you. You have to find the right one, because if you pick somebody who's really not fighting for you or working for you, then you're kind of at another huge disadvantage.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So let me address this on a personal level. Then I'll get back to how do you determine who a good divorce attorney is. So on a personal level, I'm an adopted father. We adopted our first son. I'm an attorney. I could have done the adoption. I've done them before. I chose not to do that. I chose to hire an attorney because I was too emotionally involved in the case. And it's not like it was even that hard, but I knew that if I messed it up, that I would have become emotional and I would have just gone down in a downward spiral in that case. So I hired somebody who just did adoptions to get it done. So that's kind of my personal experience with it. I hire professionals to get things done on the legal side, even though I am a lawyer. So back to how do you determine who a good attorney is? So the 100% rule. The second is you want to look online and see if they have a good presence and good reviews. Now, there are a couple things with this. If they only have 5-star reviews, like that's it, then they've put the books and you can go buy reviews. In fact, I have somebody who calls himself my competitor in my space, and every time we get to about the same number of views, he goes and buys 50 or 100 of them, right? So you can do that, and it's totally unethical, but you can do it. We don't play that game, so we have a lot of 5-star reviews because we try to take care of our clients very well. And then we have some 1-star reviews because that's just how life works. So you want a little bit of that balance, but you want good reviews, and you want to look for somebody who communicates well. So this is the next thing, the communication. Number one complaint people have with divorce attorneys and attorneys in general is they don't communicate. So I call and I don't get a call back. So what I've done, this is just an example, other people do it different ways, but what I've done is gone through and solved that problem. So in addition to all the normal communication people have with our attorneys here, text, phone call, email, they're going to get a call from their attorney every Friday. So they talk on a Tuesday, they're going to talk again on a Friday, and then the paralegal is going to send out a text midweek, every week, to see how things are going and answer any questions. So you want an attorney who communicates with you exceptionally well and on a systemic basis, not just an ad hoc basis like at random, but on a systemic basis. Because if you communicate well with your attorney, things are going to go much better for you. And then the last one, two more. You want an attorney who limits his or her caseload. Most divorce attorneys will hold 60, 80, 90, 100 clients at the same time. They don't even know their names. Yeah. And think about trying to call 100 people, 90 people on a Friday. It's just impossible. So people don't get talked to, right? So the way we do it here is we cap the number low to keep the quality really high. So you want to ask the attorney you're talking to specifically, what is your caseload right now? How many do you carry in a given time? Anything above 45, you're going to start having some real problems with communication with that attorney. So keep that in mind. And then the last one is feel. You want to go in and you want to feel like your attorney gets you, understands your situation, and is going to be somebody who advocates well for you in court. They don't have to be the same person as you, but you have to be comfortable that they're really going to advocate for you and that they know the law. And the best way I can describe that is you go in, you talk with them for an hour, and you get a feel for them. And if you trust them at the end of that hour, that's a pretty good indicator when you have all of these other things that you've also put into the mix.
A lot of people ask, a lot of people think or say, I need an attorney who is a fighter and I'm trying to think like I can't remember the term that people
bulldog, shark,
yeah, basically
Rottweiler.
Like that. Right. Is that good advice? I mean, do you need somebody that's just going to be your attack dog as an attorney or not? Because I hear different.
You need somebody.
Go ahead.
You need somebody who's going to be appropriately aggressive. So if you meet with an attorney and that attorney describes themselves as a Rottweiler or a shark or a pit bull, really what they're saying is I'm a jerk, and nobody really likes a jerk. You know, the other colleagues don't really like jerks. Judges certainly don't like jerk attorneys, so that's not going to go really well in the end. I mean, it may go well on a case basis, but overall, that's not going to go terribly well for the attorney over a career, which means that his or her clients are going to be disadvantaged over time. So you want somebody who is appropriately aggressive, right? Again, the way we do it is we want to negotiate things out and get people on with their lives. But if we need to put on boxing gloves and punch people in the face in court, then that's exactly what we'll do, because we're attorneys and we pick the time that that's appropriate.
Well, plus if you have that reputation and you can negotiate something, like if you're my attorney and the colleagues know that, then they know that, okay, we can play this game, but at some point, if their client is being unreasonable, this is going to court and we're dealing with somebody who knows what they're doing. So that does help you.
Exactly.
Even if you don't get to court, it's good to have that.
Yeah, you need that. You absolutely need that. You need to be able to pull the trigger if you have to pull the trigger.
Yeah, I hear often, I'll hear people say that they're, they realize later that their attorney is just really good at, fostering an agreement, but not good at litigating. And that's a really bad mix.
It's a dangerous, one-dimensional attorney. You have to be two-dimensional to be really good at your job.
So I want to move into this, and which a lot of the people watching this right now are really going to be interested in is, okay, so I come to you and I go, Marco, and I'll do this the starting out in the kind of crazy way. Marco, I got a crazy ex. She won't let me see my kids. I'm trying to see him. I've been served paperwork. I've been kicked out of the house. What am I supposed to do? What is and I know there's two ways to do it. My gut feeling is that you're thinking, if I come in, you're thinking, oh my God. So if I'm that guy and I come in, what's your approach, and what do I need to know when I come into an attorney if I have a situation like this?
Well, what you need to know is you need to have your narrative straight. So you need to kind of have the story that you're going to tell an attorney, and that needs to be well thought out. Now, if you're sitting down with a good attorney, the attorney is going to be able to extract that narrative from you in some sort of structure that the attorney is going to be able to understand it. But it's a lot easier when you just have it ready at hand and you can go in there and talk about it, not dispassionately, because no one's dispassionate when they get divorced, but so you're not jumping all over the place. Okay, so that's the first thing, is kind of talk about the story. This is what I want to discuss. These are the things that are really important to me and what I want to go over, and these are the questions that I want to ask the attorney. Now, again, if you can't do that because you're in such a bad emotional place, that's fine. If you're sitting down with a good attorney, the attorney's going to extract that. Like, I'm going to ask certain questions to get certain information that I need to know, and then I'm going to let people talk through things. So that's how I handle that situation. Okay,
so let's say that you look at it and you're going, okay, oh my God, this does seem like a high conflict, potentially not. Okay, just to throw it out there. I mean, obviously, if I came into you and I said, hey, I've got this 2-decade marriage. My ex was never diagnosed with anything, but let's say hypothetically she was. I'm like, hey, I'm dealing with someone who has a mental health issue, they're borderline, or they're whatever it is. Obviously that's easier because you have the document, you have a diagnosis. So I guess the first question is does a diagnosis actually help anybody in a family court case?
A diagnosis can help you in a family court case. One, depending on what the diagnosis is. So if it's depression, that's not going to help you, because I think at any given time, 11% of the American population is depressed. And I think 25% of people in their lifetime will be clinically depressed. So if we took away people's kids for depression, we'd take away everybody's kids, essentially. So, the diagnosis matters. Depression, PTSD, these sort of low-level anxiety things, that's not really going to get you anywhere. When you get to NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, the personality disorders, they certainly can help. They are rare, and sometimes I get flack from people for saying that, but on a realistic basis, they are relatively rare. Although they do account for a good amount of cause of divorce. If I remember correctly, the data, borderline personality disorder accounts for a tremendous plurality of divorces in America, upwards of, in the 30%. So because they are so extraordinarily difficult to deal with by normal people, that they get divorced, but they also can't be alone. So then they go get remarried, and they're serial divorcers. So they account for a large percentage of American divorces. So if you have those sorts of diagnoses, they can help, but they can only help in the sense that the diagnosis is an accurate proxy for their own behavior. So if you have somebody who's a narcissist, that doesn't necessarily mean that you get the kids or you get more money. What it does is, if you have a diagnosis of narcissism and then that person is also abusive to the children and abusive to you and just generally horrible, and they're having the kids for large swaths of time, is going to damage the kids, that's gold, right? That's what you have to prove. So the diagnosis is kind of the floor, and then you have all of the evidence of the abuse, and that's really the scaffolding that I don't make houses, but the framing that actually makes a house.
Foundation. It's the foundation of the case. It's building
block. Exactly.
So if you have that, but see, you made a great point, and I think this is what people need to remember, is it's really the pattern of behaviors. You know, you could, if I walked in and said, I have a piece of paper that says my ex is NPD, is diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. And if you turn around and go, okay, well, how do they take care of the kids? Oh, they do a fine job. Okay, do they get them to school on time? Oh yeah, no, the kids are, the kids get to school on time. And you're like, okay, how are they doing in school? Oh, straight A's. You know, they're all on honor roll. One of my kids only gets C's. You know, whatever. You're going to be thinking, I know it's like, well, it doesn't paint the picture. Yeah, you got that first foundation, but you put a shack on top of it, or a straw hut, and it's not going to amount to anything, right?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So you could have mental disorder of some sort, and it can absolutely not mean anything in family law court, no matter how much one of the parties, one of the spouses wants it to. And this is where I tend to differ with some of the, and I'm going to use a term, and maybe people aren't going to like it, but internet gurus out there on YouTube or whatever other channel. I'm not putting you in this, but there's some gurus out there that say, well, if they're a narcissist, or if they're this or they're that, then they're automatically a horrible human being, and you're going to really, get a lot of play in your divorce, and you've been automatically abused, and the kids have been automatically abused. Now that's not quite correct. So you can have a mental disorder and still be a relatively good person, and to such a degree that it's not really going to affect the divorce and child custody in the divorce. Those two things are separate, and people need to know they're separate, and they need to be able to put together the evidence and give the evidence to the judge in such a way that it proves abuse. That is really what the judge is going to be looking for.
No, that's a really great point. And the other thing I just want to hit on, that I deal with a lot of people who are, I have depression. My ex says they're going to take the kids away from it. But the reality is that unless there's a pattern of behavior that backs up whatever they're trying to accuse you of, you need to relax a little bit, right?
Yeah, exactly. I see this all the time from, it's both males and females, but usually males will do this to females a little bit more. So let's say a wife has depression, and the husband, for whatever reason, has decided to divorce her, and he says, well, I'm going to get the kids because you have depression, and you stay in bed sometimes, and on and on and on. Look, that is usually just a method of control, and he's probably been a controlling person throughout the marriage, and this is an extension of the control that he's trying to exert, right? So he'll say these things. I get women coming in all the time that are just scared out of their minds that they're going to lose their kids because of a fairly regular mental illness that they're trying to get help for, that they're taking their medications for. And I have to reassure them all the time, look, he's acted like this throughout your entire marriage, right? He's been a controlling guy. He's controlled the money. He's controlled where you can go. He's controlled all these things, which is probably one of the reasons you're depressed. And now he's saying he's going to use that depression against you to take the kids. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing with that, or the trap is that someone plays that game, you freak out, and then you start making mistakes. which unfortunately
Mhm.
then is the pattern of behavior that they could use to say, hey, they're depressed, and look at, they're not, they're neglecting the kids, or they're doing this, that, and the other. I mean, it's like, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, you're going to mess up, and it's like, oh my God, I'm going to mess up. And then you mess up, and then you're hosed, right?
Yeah, it's gaslighting essentially, but it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you really do need to watch it. And that's one of the reasons why going and talking with professionals like attorneys who do this all the time is really going to help you out, because I can't tell you how many, I probably met with 10,000 plus people at this point in my career. And I can't tell you how many people I've sat down with and had this very conversation where they say, oh, they say that they're going to be able to take the kids, and I'm really scared. And I say, look, that's just not going to happen. Nothing of what he or she is saying is accurate, and it's not going to happen, right? And then that reassures them, and they can act like a normal human being after that. They're not as scared.
Right.
So that's one of the nice things about sitting down with an attorney and really asking all the questions that you have and having them answered by somebody who does this every day.
Yeah. One of the other things I find really fascinating and by that is you can get so wrapped up in what your ex is saying, and then you make the mistake of going and talking to your friends, and they say, what's the stereotypical thing? Oh, you're the guy, you're automatically going to lose, or worse, it's like, oh, you're the woman, so you're automatically going to win, so you don't need to do anything, just, you know what I mean? It's like, you really need to ask the right people, and find people who really know what the hell they're talking about to get real actionable advice on the direction you need to go.
Yeah, if you're sitting around reading divorce stories on the internet, that's not going to go well for you. If you're listening to like your friend Susie's cousin about her divorce and how she got $5,000 a month in alimony, and you're going to get $5,000 a month in alimony, even though your husband makes $8,000 a month. I mean, none of this makes sense, but this is what I have to deal with every day when people go to the internet and they read these crazy stories, which are just almost uniformly not true. I mean, I've read them and they don't even make sense, but I have to deal with that. Right. So
right.
Do yourself a favor. You want to read some of that, great. But then the chaser to that has to be sitting down with an attorney who does this stuff all the time and is well respected in the community, and get your answers from him or her.
If I can find this real quick, I've had a few questions come in. It's kind of hard to find them. Well, I'll just read this. My moderator sent it to me. So Adam H says, what are some of the interview questions that a client should ask a new attorney to know, so if I'm coming to you, what would be good questions that I would ask to know that you're the right guy for me?
Specific questions are tough because so much of what we do is really going over your story and then you be able to answer questions. So I'll give a couple things that I would ask, but really what you want to do is you want to be able to tell your story in the beginning to the attorney, and you want the attorney to shut up and listen to you. So if you have an attorney who interrupts you all the time, and not interrupts with questions, because that's normal human conversation, and the attorney needs to know those things. That's why the attorney's asking. But if the attorney's just interrupting you to kind of pontificate, then that's probably not really the best way to go about this. And then when you ask questions, you want an attorney to answer those questions in a way that you understand them. So if the attorney uses jargon or legalese and you don't really understand what they're saying, then you probably don't have a really skilled divorce attorney, because it's easy for an attorney to use jargon. It's much, much harder for an attorney to express difficult legal concepts in a way that non-attorneys can understand it in a short amount of time. So if you find an attorney that does that, that's an attorney who's really skilled at their craft. Then the specific questions, like I said before, you want to ask the attorney what percentage of your practice is dedicated to divorce, and you want at least 90%. I would ask also what the caseload is. Like I said, anything above 45 is probably not a good number. And you want to ask it like this: how many divorce cases do you currently have? Right? Because you ask another type of question, an attorney can fudge that answer. If you ask specifically, how many do you have right now? And the attorney says 70, then it's going to be way above 45 on a regular basis.
Right. I see what you're saying. And I think an interesting part about what you were just saying too is just by the communication, that's kind of your test too, right? So I don't necessarily have to go, okay, Marco, let me ask you these 5 questions. It's more of analyzing the interaction, the response. So if I'm telling you a situation and you start asking questions or you start saying things where I'm like, oh, okay, this guy gets it, then I know you're more spot on. I loved what you just said about having an attorney who can explain to you in normal human communication what's actually going on, as opposed to just throwing out all the legal terms. That's a really smart one, because this stuff is so damn confusing.
Yeah, it can be. And, in some sense it's meant to be confusing. I mean, it's not, but it kind of is. Lawyers are what I like to call a cartel. So they're a relatively limited number of attorneys, and it's hard to become an attorney. Like, it's hard to become a doctor, and there's probably a good reason for that. But with that, attorneys tend to want to make things more complicated than they actually are in order to show their intelligence, because being an attorney is a status symbol, and a lot of attorneys kind of treat it like a status symbol. But good and very excellent attorneys do not care about their status. They care about communicating clearly with their clients.
No, that's a great point. So the next thing I wanted to I guess dive into is false allegations, and I mean, just the smear that happens in court. And I guess the first question I'll ask on that, and this is what I tell most people, is I think everybody involved, attorneys like yourself and judges, they kind of expect everyone's going to they hate everybody. And, so if I come in and say, oh, my ex is a really bad person, they're a bad parent and they hate their kid, or whatever the heck it is, I can't go in and be thinking, okay, everyone's going to hear that at 100% and take it like, oh, wow, Dwayne is saying this, so this must be true. I mean, it's like there's this. So, I mean, I guess the first part about the question is that an accurate assessment on my part that's kind of everyone's story is suspect?
Yeah, everybody's story is suspect. So judges will kind of automatically not believe what people are telling them, and for good reason. They're meant to be skeptical. If you have a judge that just buys everything that everybody says, that's a horrible judge. And the same kind of thing with attorneys. Attorneys need to have a healthy respect for their client's story, and also realize that everybody lies to them to some degree. So, they need to realize that as well, and they need to pick at their client's story a bit, not to denigrate their client in any way or really prove they're lying, but to bolster the case. So you want an attorney that does that so they can bolster a case, because when you go into court, you need to be able to put up goods, right? You need to be able to prove your case with evidence, with actual evidence. And the only way you can do that as an attorney is to have picked apart the story and then put together the evidence to prove the story.
Let me dovetail on that. Because some people, it's like, I got this binder of 900 pages worth of evidence. And I remember when I first talked to my attorney, they basically said, your statements and your stuff needs to be like a couple of pages, and really get to the point, because no one's going to read it. And what I try to tell people is you got to really focus on the hard hitting issues that really prove your point, or really are clear examples of what you're dealing with, right?
Yeah. So let's take child custody, for example. So child custody, there are a lot of factors upon which a judge makes a child custody determination, but there are really about 2 or 3 that make the most difference. Who's the primary parent, what the status quo of the parenting was. So what I mean by status quo is how it was before you started the divorce process. So if you both live together and we're both very active parents in the kids' lives, and then you want to get divorced, and one side says, well, I need 90% of the time, and the other person should get 10% of the time, the status quo is going to dictate, probably not. You really didn't think that before the divorce started, so I'm probably not going to go along with that. So there are really 2 or 3 factors that are super, super important. And what we do as attorneys, and what people need to realize out there, is you don't want to go prove every single factor. You want to have a whole bunch of very good evidence about the 2 or 3 factors that are going to make the most difference to the judge.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. So the other thing on this, or the other question I wanted to ask, which kind of pivots this, is false allegations and false domestic, or we'll just say restraining orders, right? Because that's the thing. I get constantly people who are like, I have a temporary protective order, a restraining order. Sometimes my opinion normally is like, okay, so that just because they've filed a restraining order doesn't mean you've lost. Take a breath, relax, don't make any mistakes. But how do you fight that? I mean, if a client comes in and says, oh my God, Marco, I got kicked out of my house. I didn't even know. The cop showed up, said, get out. Let's say they didn't get arrested or anything, but now they have a restraining order, and it's like they can't come around the kids or anything. That's not great, but how bad is that? And what realistically are my options if I'm that person, and what's my way forward to try to deal with that?
I think this comes in, really, there are 2 different types of this. One is where you actually did what your spouse is saying, right. And then there's the type where you didn't actually do it. And the type where you didn't actually do it is unfortunately high, especially post-COVID. Since we got into COVID, people are filing, at least here in Utah, people are filing a lot more protective orders that are pretty bogus, simply because it just takes longer to get into court. So they're like, well, let's just throw a protective order out there and see what we can get, which is a very, very dirty way to do divorce law. I don't engage in it. I hate that kind of stuff, but we have to deal with it. So let's do this. If you actually did what was alleged in the protective order, then what we have to do as attorneys is say, okay, well, you did this thing, so we're going to deal with the protective order itself. The protective order doesn't mean you're going to lose your kids, but it is going to make things more difficult for you. And if you engage in domestic violence, that's one of the factors that really plays with judges. So we need to do X, Y, and Z to kind of rehabilitate you. And we just come up with a game plan at the beginning to deal with that situation. If it's a protective order that is bogus, then we're going to go fight the protective order and try to get it kicked out or dismissed so we don't have to deal with it. Right. So that's the first line of defense. And then, we go on with the case from there.
Well, I like what you said, that even if I did do it, it doesn't mean you've completely lost. I mean, right. Because I often tell people, like, okay, if you made a mistake, there's ways to mitigate. Well, now what you have to do is you have to say, okay, you know what? I have problems. So I'm going to anger management courses, or here I'm doing therapy, or I'm doing something to where it's like, okay, I recognize I have a problem, or I recognize I made a mistake, and I'm working towards fixing it, right? I mean, that would be a good course of action on that, to try to deal with that.
Yeah, that's the best course of action. I believe in the redemption of the human soul. I believe in the redemption of the divorced person's soul as well during a divorce. So let's say that you engaged in domestic violence, and there are ways to rehabilitate that. Hopefully it's not something that's gone on for a long time, because the longer it's gone on and the more incidents that somebody's engaged in, the harder it is to rehabilitate them. But if it's a one-off or two-off, then there are ways that we can deal with that. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to lose your kids. Maybe your spouse tells you that, but that's just not the way it tends to work in divorce law. We don't take the worst moment of somebody's life and then extrapolate that out for the rest of their life and say, well, you don't get your kids because of this one thing.
I think that's I'm glad you said that too, because I think so often I've seen the other side, where somebody feels that they finally got their ex. They got all the documentation. They can prove that they are a horrible, garbage human being. And in the back of my mind, I think 2 things. I'm like, you don't expect to go into court and have, that day be like, oh my God, the veil's been lifted. We all understand now, let's march the ex through the middle of the street. I don't think that typically happens. And the other flip side to it is, especially with a toxic person, they don't normally just sit there and idly by and just let it happen, right? I mean, it's like if they feel like they're trapped, what I've seen is they come out with just a barrage of extra allegations or something and just completely derail the whole process. And then I end up talking with people afterwards who are just shell-shocked after they walk out of court going, what the hell happened? I mean, is that common? Do you see that a lot too?
Yeah, and that's going to depend on the other person's personality. So if they really do have a personality disorder, or they don't even have a personality disorder, they're just deeply dishonest as a human being, which happens. Maybe you don't have, maybe you're not married to somebody with a personality disorder. You're just married to a deeply dishonest jerk, right? But in either case, they act like this, and they realize that things are going to go poorly for them, so they just start making stuff up. So what we do as attorneys, and what I think is really helpful for people to understand, is that evidence and documentation wins. Like, the better the evidence you have, the better you tend to do in your divorce case, especially when it comes to child custody. So if the other person is making up all of these allegations, then it's our job as attorneys to try to prove a negative. So I always say this: if you make an allegation, you have the burden to prove that allegation. It's called the burden of proof. But I don't ever treat it that way. I treat it as an allegation has been made against my client, so I need to disprove that. And in doing that, I will get much better evidence and have much stronger arguments. So that's how we deal with it here. We don't just sit on our laurels and say, well, you made an allegation, you need to prove it up. It's like, no, you made an allegation, so I'm going to disprove it. I'm going to prove you're a frickin' liar in front of a judge, and then I'm going to have a much stronger case.
So it's interesting you say that too, because what I have seen, and this will roll into my next question, what I have seen is people get into this, they're slinging mud for years, right? And it's like the sweet spot, which I hate to say it as a sweet spot, but it seems like a lot of the trend I've seen is like 8 years into their disaster of a divorce, that's when things tend to pivot. And I think the reason is because the first 8 years, everything you just said, the people weren't doing a good job of, right? So they weren't building their case correctly. They weren't really describing it correctly. And then there's just so much volume that finally makes it. Does that kind of seem the case too, where people start out where maybe they're hitting these allegations, and then after time it annoys the court system where the judges finally say, okay, this is ridiculous? I mean, what's the process on that?
That will usually happen long before 8 years. So if you have a
good attorney,
yeah. If you have an 8-year case, then somebody is deeply disturbed. Okay, right. So most divorce cases will take somewhere on the order of 3 to 6 months of active time to really get done. If here in Utah, if we go to trial, that's usually somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 months. If we do a custody evaluation, maybe 18 months to 2 years. That's a fairly long period of time. Yeah. If it goes beyond, 2 to 3 years, there's something wrong. If it's just continual court for 8 years, then somebody is deeply, deeply disturbed, and the judge has been very upset about this for a very long time.
So on that though, how do you, what it seems like a lot of times is, and it's just really bizarre, that a toxic high conflict person, potentially narcissist, potentially NPD, has a unique ability to frame the story to where they seem like they're the perfect little butterfly, or handsome, reasonable guy, and the other person is just crazy, which kind of makes sense because if you've been going through this and it feels crazy, how do you know, like, if at the end of that, this long period of time, that you're not, or like I wouldn't be the person that's being perceived as the problem? I mean, how do you deal with that?
Well, you can be perceived as the problem. Again, it's usually evidence, and a family law, divorce is just a difficult place place to be, because a lot of times there's not great evidence. Like, you do not sit down and journal every dumb thing that your spouse does, because if you do stuff like that, your marriage doesn't tend to go well, right? So there's not a lot of like contemporaneous evidence for a lot of these things. Now, there is, we can get statements from other people, maybe people outside the family. There are ways we can get evidence, text messages, emails, videos. So there are ways we can do it, but sometimes there's just a dearth of evidence in a divorce case, and it makes it very difficult when somebody is actually very skilled on the other side and will make you out to be the problem. Now, what I can tell you is usually people are not this skilled. I get a lot of people who come in to my office and they'll say, oh, my ex is this, this, and this, and they're very good at what they do. And this has been going on a long time, and I think they've kind of set this up, right? And my reaction to that is, yeah, that happens sometimes. Most of the time, though, human beings just kind of do the thing that comes in the moment. So they're not as skilled at this as you probably think they are. And people are able to see them for who they are after, a little bit of time. So, take solace in that it's more readily apparent to people on the outside than it is to you a lot of times, because you're in it every day. You're married to this person. You're willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, but attorneys are not really like that, and judges are not really like that. So they can kind of, and psychologists are not really like that either. So they can kind of see through it.
No, thanks. I appreciate you throwing that out there, because I think so many people just think it's all lost, and it's like, if you just hunker down, you don't take the bait, right? I mean, it's hard, right? It's hard to not get lighted. I always screw that word up, but you have to focus on, like, for me, if I was your client, I would think, okay, I need to calm down. I need to make sure that I'm portraying that I'm reasonable and sane, and start focusing, let the other person self-implode so everyone can see it. And I need to stop distracting people from seeing the truth, right?
Yeah, sometimes you just need to get out of your own way and let the other person talk.
Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you is a big term that I'm sure a lot of people come in and say, Marco, I'm a victim of parental alienation. My ex is brainwashing my kids. How is parental alienation perceived in the family law system, and how do you deal with that?
So parental alienation happens in degrees. So the idea of parental alienation is that one parent actively alienates the child against the other parent by giving them bad information about the other parent. So making up lies about the other parent, or telling them truths that are meant to alienate the kid. I get that a lot. Well, I told my kids that my husband has been sleeping with hookers. I mean, come on. You're just a jerk if you do stuff like that. You are actively trying to alienate the kids. And they'll say, well, I did it because I'm being honest with the children. I'm like, well, don't be honest with the kids then. Just don't tell them anything, right? That is an act of parental alienation. That is horrible. You should not be doing that. Wait until they're 18. You can have an adult discussion with them at that point. Don't be doing that to 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds. So that's the idea of parental alienation. Now, parental alienation tends to happen on a low level on a fairly regular basis, because we are humans and we don't like our spouses anymore. And that comes across to our children. They pick up on this, and then they kind of wonder why. And maybe you tell them a little bit about it. So it does happen on a low level between both males and females engage in it quite often in a divorce case. What really, the really bad situations is when somebody engages in it to a really, really high degree, and they're doing it specifically to completely and totally alienate one child from the other parent. That is actually relatively rare as a phenomenon. And I'm trying to think if men or women do it more often. I represent about 50% men and 50% women. I think I tend to see women do it slightly more often than men, especially since women are usually around the kids a little bit more. But either way, it's just gross, and it's terrible to go through that. But it is relatively rare as a phenomenon.
I think it's interesting you say that, and not so much that it's rare, but what I was taking away when you were saying that is like, okay, so everyone, all the professionals, you, the judges, the attorneys, the therapists, everything, understand that there's a little bit going on. So if I come in and say, oh my God, I'm being alienated against my kids, my ex is doing parental alienation. If I don't come in with really good examples of what's happening, it's like, it's no one's, it's like, yeah, okay. I mean, so my credibility, or the credibility I would have is going to be diminished, right? I mean, oh, somebody's driving
Yes.
by. The
Sorry.
other thing
Yes.
I wanted to say on that is what I tell people oftentimes is it's a lot of times it's not overt, right? It's not like what you were just that really bad example of, oh, your dad, sleeps with hookers or whatever. But it's more subtle to where it's just like, oh, I really wish your dad was not so angry, or just these like little nuggets of information that they plant a seed in a child's mind, and then they bounce over to your house and they're thinking about that, and then a question comes up or a situation comes up, and then you perform in a way or act in a way to where the child is going, oh my God, what mom said, dad's doing. And I think I think we play a big role in our own parental alienation by taking the bait and not taking the opportunity to say, okay, you know what? Going through this experience, I need to pause for a minute and start trying to become a better person, become a better parent, deal with things in a better way. And that's the thing I've seen that helps. But okay, so that was a statement, not a question. So if a person is dealing with severe parental alienation, like let's say the kids, this is the question I'll get to then. So the kids now say they don't, like, I hate daddy, I don't want to go over there. It's like, so let's say I'm the weekend dad, or let's say I got 50-50, but I've made some mistakes, and now the kids are saying, I don't want to stay with you, dad, I want to stay with mommy, and how do you deal with that? I mean, I have my own opinion on what that is an indicator of, but if I was coming in with you saying that's my situation, what would be the approach to deal with that?
Really two things that I found to be effective over my career. So if you have a case where there's legitimate parental alienation on a high level, which again, relatively rare, but you have that sort of case, then you need to get as much time with your children as you possibly can. Because the more time you have with your kids, the more influence you have over your children. So if you have 10% of the time with your kids and your spouse who's alienating you, the kids from you, has 90%, you have absolutely no chance to unalienate those children. So you need to get as much time as you possibly can with the kids. 50-50, you have much fewer way fewer problems with alienation than at like 90-10 or 80-20.
I just let me ask that. Are you saying that at the beginning you need to do that, or if I've been alienated and I'm at that weekend dad thing and I'm seeing it, then do I come back to you and say, hey, Marco, this is what's going on, I need more time? Or am I kind of hosed at that point if I've already been relegated to the weekend dad, so to speak, the 80-20 type?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I always tell people that you need to fight for as much time with your kids as you possibly can. You need to fight to maximize your time with your kids at the very beginning, because it's more difficult to do it later on. So if you don't get that 50-50 and you have like the 90-10 and you're relegated to weekends, the way you have to, this is really the only effective way to deal with it, is you go back and you modify your divorce decree and you say, I want primary physical custody of my kids. So I want the majority of time with my children. I've talked with psychologists about this. I've talked with therapists who do reunification therapy and parental alienation therapy and assessment. And I said, okay, brass tacks, what's the best way to deal with that? And they say, the only way to deal with it is to change custody. If parental alienation is on a high level and is really going on, the only way you're really going to get over it is to change custody, because I can do therapy with these kids, but I see them once a week, and then the parent who's alienating the children after we get done with therapy just spends 3 hours alienating the children to make up for the hour that I spent with them. So you really got to change things.
Now, does that work? I mean, have you had success with that in a situation where somebody was the weekend dad, so to speak, and they were dealing with this, and then build a case to go back and say, look, dad needs to be the primary resident? Does that work?
It can work. It's always an uphill battle. Okay. But if you have a real case of parental alienation and you have to get experts to do this. Like, you cannot just go in with your evidence and give it to the judge and then assume the judge is going to see parental alienation, because maybe that happens, but you have a much, much stronger case If you have a reunification therapist and the reunification therapist says, yeah, I think there's parental alienation going on, and then you get a custody evaluator who's informed on these, and the custody evaluator makes that sort of determination. So you really need experts to do this, and that's an expensive process.
Yeah.
It takes a long time, and it's an uphill battle. But you really, your choice is, do I capitulate to this or do I fight it?
So let me ask you this, because I mean, obviously, if I had the resources to do it, it's easy. You fight it. But let's say I'm a client who has financially ruined. My child support and alimony is, I mean, I'm basically now living paycheck to paycheck. I don't have any money. Let's say I've lost all my, I don't have assets. What are my options? Do I just capitulate, or what would I do?
Yeah, you either capitulate to the alienation, and look, I totally understand that people do that. They're just emotionally spent through divorce. It's been terrible. You have the other person, as the other person is alienating the kids. It's not like they just started alienating the kids when the divorce happened. I mean, sometimes that happens, but usually that's been going on for a long period of time. So you've been dealing with this for a long period of time, and you're just emotionally done, and you can't do it anymore, and you give up. Like, I get that. That's not the way I would play it, probably, because I am who I am, but I totally understand that. But if you don't want to capitulate, then you do what everybody does who really wants to buy something, and you go find the money. I mean, that's the only way that I can describe this. People spend, just an example, people spend on average $9,000 per year on a car in America. $9,000 per year. That's insane when you think about it, but those are the numbers. So you can find money to do these things if you really, really want to. I mean, think about it like this. If your kid needed surgery, or your kid was going to die in 2 weeks, you are going to do whatever is necessary to find the money so your kid gets that surgery. That's the kind of mindset you have to have if you don't have the money and you want to fight a situation like this, because at that point you are going to go do whatever you can to get that money and to go through the process.
No, that's a good point. I know that's a bitter pill for people to hear and to accept. And I mean, and I know I provide other techniques if you don't have the money. I mean, that's kind of what my channel caters to a lot. But hey, Marco, we're starting to run out of time. Is there anything you want to finally say on this, or a little nugget of truth that could be the epiphany, the eye opener for the people listening right now?
I think something very important to realize when you're going through a divorce and you're going through litigation, and look, when I talk like an attorney. God made me to be an attorney, and I love what I do, so this is the way I talk about things. And you really give people great resources when that aren't going through the litigation process or can't afford to go through the litigation process, and that's absolutely necessary. But I talk as an attorney. So what I think people really need to understand is, when you go into an attorney or you go into a judge, you do not tell the judge what is in your head. You don't tell the judge your opinion of your ex. So you don't say, yep, I'm fairly certain he or she is a narcissist, or blah, 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 blah. That everybody's going to turn off when you do stuff like that. And you can't assume that the judge or the attorneys are necessarily going to believe you. So what you have to do is you have to think through your story, and then you have to put together evidence, like good, solid evidence, text messages, statements from other people, videos, audio recordings, whatever they are, emails. And you have to lay that out, and you have to say, oh, okay, this is part of my narrative, right? This is part of my story, and here's the evidence that backs up part of my story. So you really do have to think about this as an attorney, because you are going into a situation where you're dealing with attorneys and you're dealing with judges, and judges and attorneys work off evidence. They don't just work off kind of lay conjecture or stuff people say. So that is extraordinarily important, and that's not how non-lawyers think about things most of the time. Right. And that's totally fine, because if you thought about your life in that way every moment of the day, you go absolutely insane. But you have a situation now that necessitates that. So you have to realize it, and you have to start putting together the evidence.
Thanks, Marco, for hanging out with us today. I really appreciate it. I know we probably just covered maybe the tip of the iceberg in this time, but thank you so much for giving us this hour to pick your brain. And thanks. I appreciate it, man.
It was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Hey guys, I'll leave Marco's links in the description and the show notes. Check him out. I'll also put the link for his TikTok. A lot of great information, even if you're not in the Salt Lake City area. I do want to say thank you to all the channel members as I wrap this up. Thank you guys for making all this stuff happen. The names are scrolling on the screen on that, and I will be back tomorrow. Be kind to yourself. Don't let all this. I mean, I know this is incredibly stressful, but take a breath and don't let this basically dominate your life.